Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. If you'd like, go ahead and toss in the chat where you're joining us from, because these do air on the internet. So I know people join us from all over. So welcome to the 43rd episode of the Canadian Society for Organic Urban Land Care's National Weekly Zoom Series, 2022 Year of the Ecological Garden. My name's Sandora Alford-Purvis, and I'm hosting today from Ottawa, Ontario, which is on the unceded lands of the Algonquin Anishinaabe people. We meet every Tuesday at 3 Eastern, noon Pacific, for 45 minutes with members of the Soul community and anyone else interested in holistic approaches to land care. We can't do our work alone, and we gratefully acknowledge support from Gaia College, the leading school for organic land care professional development and diploma courses. Every month, we feature a theme that impacts our work, and this month's theme is the right to garden. Cate Henderson is our guest today, and she will be talking about land access, seed saving, and food sovereignty. After her presentation, we'll open up to the audience to take questions either via chat, which I can read out, or you can unmute and ask your questions directly. All right, please go ahead and take it away, Cate.
Great, thanks, Sandora. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can hear you.
Awesome. Okay. Oops. Get ahead of myself. So yes, I am very happy to be here. I am an accredited organic land care practitioner myself. And so this is very dear to my heart, and I think it's a great topic. And I want to thank you folks for including this as a month-long topic. I think it's excellent, and I hope we can do a deep dive. I'm gonna go through this pretty quickly, so that we have lots of time to chat afterwards. So yes, today's focus will be. Oh, sorry, it's going. Yeah, I wanted to talk a little bit about access to land for sure, access to knowledge and access to seeds. And part of that is because I am a seed keeper and gardener for the Gentege Seed Sanctuary and Learning Center on Haudenosaunee land, Tyendinaga Mohawk territory. I'm speaking to you today from unceded land, mostly held by the Wendake and the Anishinaabe. I live just north of the Haudenosaunee lands, but that's where I work. I'm very fortunate to do that. I am a settler here in Canada. I am Indigenous to Scotland. So I'm speaking from that perspective. I'm a former gardener and director of the Heirloom Seed Sanctuary, Sisters of Providence of St. Vincent de Paul. I'm not sure if anyone would have heard of that. And I'm an MA candidate in sustainability studies at Trent University, researching seed savers' contribution to food security in the context of climate change. So some of what I'm going to talk to you about today does relate to that research, because some of the barriers to seed saving are also barriers to land care, obviously. So there's a few things about access to land. I'm not going to talk too much about poverty or life stage. I think they're pretty obvious. Most of us are aware of the price of real estate nowadays, and how it's pretty much inaccessible to a lot of people for economic reasons. I did want to mention life stage, because I don't know if many of you are noticing this, but the photo on the left there is my daughter, and she practices organic land care herself, although she's not a professional at it or anything. But she lives with her dad on his property, and young people who have the energy and the interest and sometimes knowledge, not always, but sometimes knowledge, are often excluded from land ownership. Again, related to our economic system, of course. But yeah, just something to think about, as a barrier, because again, these people have strong backs. and they are very passionate and they love this stuff. So I think access to land at a certain life stage would be really actually in our best interest to help these folks. I have two interns at the Gentegi Seed Sanctuary and Learning Center, both in their late 20s, early 30s, and both of them live with their mothers and do not have access to their own land. So they're pretty happy to garden at the Gentegi Seed Sanctuary and Learning Center. But the third thing about access to land that I did want to talk about today is the whole issue of land back. So speaking as a settler myself, and my husband and I do own, in air quotes, own our little property where we live. But really, you know, this land is not ours. The legal system by which my husband and I own this land is not actually very solid. It's not on solid ground at all. It's based on, you know, the doctrine of discovery, which was a papal bull back in the 1500s. And it's it wouldn't really hold a lot of water. So it's something to think about, because land access to land is definitely wrapped up in this. Many of us who do have access to land are on shaky ground, and many people who should have access to land do not, because they have been put on reserves and so forth. So this is just a conversation that we are going to have. Very fortunate. I'm just at the beginning of my own discovery of this issue. So not an expert by any means, but I'm really happy to be able to, just bring this up for discussion. As part of my master's, I did take a course on Indigenous settler relations, and this is a big one. This land back issue is a big one, and the legalities surrounding land, the legal system in this country. The photo on the right-hand side is of the very first gardens that we started at the Gentegi Seed Sanctuary and Learning Center, and it's Haudenosaunee land and has been for hundreds of years. And often when we host tours, the tour group will be told that they are no longer in Canada. They are on Tyendinaga Mohawk territory. So I have not yet been asked for a passport when I go to work, but this is something we are definitely going to have to talk about. This is a huge issue. So hopefully we'll have time for a chat about that. I also wanted to talk about access to knowledge of how to care for land, because that's another one that's come up in my research a lot. People don't really know how to garden ecologically. There's a lot of, maybe not misinformation, but there's a lot of, it can be kind of controversial, right? Different opinions on how to practice land care, how to be in relationship with land, which was what, you know, that whole notion of care comes down to. How do we develop a relationship with something that we traditionally don't see as being sentient, that we traditionally don't see as, you know, maybe caring for us in return, although I think intellectually we can all see that the earth does care for us. So one of the things that's come up, as I say in my research, is that people just don't know. This is specifically in relation to seeds, but in my experience, it does apply also to land care. So again, there was a time when everyone had access to a farm growing up, and children would learn hands-on various land care practices from parents and grandparents. But as we know, that's no longer the case. Children don't necessarily learn these things growing up. So as adults, we have to seek out this information, which can be a barrier. And some knowledge, in particular Indigenous knowledge of how this land in particular can be cared for and care for us. Some of that knowledge is just lost. Oops, sorry. And as languages are lost, that knowledge can be lost, because a lot of the Indigenous languages reflect that knowledge. Their words contain a lot of knowledge. So yeah, it's just come up over and over again, especially as a barrier for young people in practicing seakeeping, but also in land care. And then the last issue, I've actually lost access to my clock, so I'm not sure what time it is. Hopefully we're on track.
You're just fine. Carry on. No rush.
Yeah, so access to seeds. And I know seeds are maybe peripheral to the issue of barriers to land care, but at some point as a gardener, you're going to have to seek out some seeds. Many of us do plant transplants, and a lot of gardening is about going to the nursery and buying some plant stock and bringing it home and transplanting and all of that sort of thing. But a lot of us do still buy seeds and plant seeds, and this can be for ornamentals, but a lot of our food crops, as I'm sure you know, are grown from seed still to this day. So this is largely the subject of my research. As I said, I have been a seed grower myself for many years, a couple of decades at least, and I do actively save seeds myself. And it was the sort of the impetus for my research was just interacting a lot with the community, knowing that part of my job was to teach seed saving, and finding that many people just don't know how. They don't know how seeds work. They buy them at the store and plant them, and that's the end of the seed for them. But seeds, of course, are there's a whole cycle surrounding seeds, and a lot of the seeds that we need to be using more of in order to care for the land really are in short supply, actually. So we can't just take it for granted that we will have access to the right seeds at the right time. Again, a lot of native plant species, indigenous plant species. I'm sure Sundara has lots to say about this, but yeah, they're just not available as much as they should be. So if you're trying to plant native plants and perennial species on your property to sort of do some healing, do some land care, you may find yourself with barriers to that. So my research particularly is around food crops, annual seeds, annual food crops that grow from seeds every year, and certainly access to the indigenous crops that First Nations people relied on in this area anyway for a lot of their food. The corn, beans, and squash, the three sisters that we all have heard about, but there are other sisters as well, many of which also moved north from Central and South America, like tomatoes and potatoes, sunchokes, etc., sunflowers. These have all, we have varieties of them. We can find them in stores, but the traditional varieties, the indigenous varieties, are much less available. There's less access to some of those old varieties, and the issue with that is that many of them, as I say, have moved north from Central America and South America. So adapting as they came north, So they have that ability to adapt. And as our climate changes, we need more seeds and food crops with that ability built in, that ability to adapt, in a relatively short period of time. We may not have much time. So yeah, access to seeds is a big one. The bean that you're looking at in the photo there, Duane Baptiste bush bean, was grown at Cate Seed Sanctuary and Learning Center, and it is a traditional bean to the Haudenosaunee folks there. It's specific to that community in Tyendinaga, and we are very lucky to have some of it and to have been able to add it to our seed collection that we're growing there. But it's down to the wire. There's not very many people growing it anymore. And yeah, certainly buying it from a seed catalog or whatever is not likely to happen. We're probably not going to find access to it through those what we would call traditional or conventional routes. But it's very important. So I put together just a few resources on some of these things that we've talked about. So I'll leave this slide up, I guess. There are lots more. There's the National Farmers Union in Canada is doing a great job on seed issues. Maybe more grains, of course, which is maybe not what we're so interested in, but it's definitely relevant. And of course, I'm sure Sundora has lots more resources on growing native species for home gardens and that kind of thing. But the land back issue and those legal issues surrounding land ownership and all that sort of thing, there's a couple of good, excellent resources here, Canadian resources specifically. And then if you ever have a chance, this is an actual book, First the Seed by Jack Kloppenberg. It talks about capitalism, basically. So our economic system that I referred to at the very start of the talk, and how that is a barrier to seeds and land as well. It's just not a very logical system when it comes to that. So I have rattled that off very quickly. So now I'm probably, when I tried this out, I went way over time. But maybe we're okay.
Oh, we were just fine.
Great.
Yeah, we've got lots of time to chat.
Okay.
So yeah, no, there's just some good. I got some of them over into the chat, just sort of with quick Google. The particular Doctrine of Discovery article, I hadn't quite found that, but I don't know if you can copy and paste from your presentation into the chat. Yeah, and
yeah.
so we can, if you want to end, you can. It's probably easiest if you just end the screen share, then the exit your presentation. Then you should be able to copy paste it over. Because it was such a long link, and APTN has quite a few things on Doctrine of Discovery, so I didn't get it on a real quick Google search.
Yeah, fair enough.
Yeah, no, it's yeah, I think the learning about the Doctrine of Discovery, and then people go, well, that's ridiculous, and then you go, oh yes, that's the basis of land ownership in this country.
Exactly.
It's like just that idea of it also always makes me laugh a little bit when I see the billboards by some of the highways or people signs on farms going about the government back off on our land, and I'm like, do you know you only own that land because of something the government did? Like the concept of owning that land is entirely made up under this government, and if the government's gone, you own the land. You know, I have issues with the government, but just also understand your history of land ownership isn't just a thing that automatically happens and exists outside legal structures.
Absolutely.
It's entirely dependent on them. Yeah, no, so there's a lot there. And I imagine the two of us can probably delve pretty deep on a bunch of the aspects of it, which I will start on in a moment because I jotted down some thoughts while you're presenting. But also, if anyone else here would like to make an observation or ask a question, absolutely please do. You can either put it in the chat or you can unmute and ask directly. So yeah, on the whole land access thing, there's the price of land, and then there's life stages at which land is something that you can access, which is often not the same life stage where you have the most energy to actually do anything with the land. And there's actually real land use. The way the land use laws run actually have a huge effect on that as well, because it's really easy to join two parcels of land together, but it's actually hard to make a farm smaller so that it can be, so that say a group of people want to get together and buy average farm size. I did a quick search, it's 820, the average farm size is now 820 acres in Canada, which means that you have to have all the equipment and like the big tractors and all of that to operate that. And if you want to get together with a bunch of people and buy even an 800-acre farm, and everybody put their tiny homes on it, and everybody, you know, take care of their 5, 10, 50, maybe 100 acres if you're doing grazing and mixed forestry and everything else, our laws won't allow that. You can't all get together and split it up into some pieces, even though if a whole bunch of people wanted to actually practice agriculture at a human scale, more food could come from that space.
Absolutely, and, yes. Small scale peasant farming really does feed our world more so than the large scale.
Yeah, it's often deemed as inefficient because it requires more human labor, but it requires less of every other input and produces more food per space. But our laws prevent you from doing that.
Yeah.
So land access,
crazy.
Yeah, land access is a big deal. It's reinforced by our legal structures. Even when people who actually, because the argument is always that, well, people don't want to, like, people don't want to do that kind of farming. I'm like, I could in my network find you 50 people that if they could do that, they would.
Absolutely, same, yeah.
Yeah, so it's we have a lot of legal structures that are actually pushing, they support export farming, like growing grains for export, but don't support growing food locally. And heads of lettuce just went up to $4.50 each at the grocery store in the last couple of weeks. We need more local food because won't be able to afford the food from California for much longer. Or at the very least, people could be charging that for food they're growing here and selling, at which point it becomes a funded career.
Exactly.
But yeah, are there any interesting, because I know I've seen some interesting approaches to breaking up, not legally breaking them up, but breaking up the use of land, so there'd still be a legal parcel. Are you seeing anything in your work about people actually sort of getting access to land and then dividing it between smaller groups of people? Are you seeing anything like that in your work?
Well, so I haven't seen much of that, but land. So I have been exclusively working for the Guntegay Seed Sanctuary Learning Center for 3 years now, and land ownership on the reserve is very different. So it's just not people don't own land on the reserve. So in order to use land for a specific purpose, you just apply to the Band Council and you figure out, you know, which parcels of land are available and how. So it does work a bit differently, but certainly it's still similar in that individuals don't have their choice of land, really. Like, you can't just build wherever you want to. If you can't apply to the Band Council and build somewhere. But Yeah, so well, maybe the Gentegi Seed Sanctuary and Learning Center is actually an example of that, I guess, because it was a group of people that got together for this specific purpose, and they did apply to the Band Council, and they were given a choice of, I think, 3 different properties on the reserve, and they went around and had a look and chose the one that we're currently on, which is 15 acres. So there's lots of room for us to expand. There's no shortage of room there for us for seed keeping. But yeah, it's a bit different. But yeah, in terms of like where I actually live in a settler community, I haven't seen very much in terms of creative ways of addressing that issue.
Yeah, I know here in Ottawa, there's a few groups sort of working on different models. Yeah, there's one actually. I double checked the date. It's going to be on the 22nd this month. It's 3 weeks. Somebody's going to actually do a talk on how they've got access to some of the Greenbelt, the National Capital Commission owned Greenbelt land. They leased it, and then they're actually doing a cooperative farming for community level sort of growing, so people can grow their own food and everybody shares the labor and then everybody shares the harvest. So there's some interesting, how do you break down these barriers, these land access barriers, and scale what is possible for people. So you don't have to be able to take care of a huge amount of space, but you also have some access to growing food. And yeah, that's where
I wondered if there was, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
I wondered if there would be something I hear about land access agreements, and as something that could be potentially set up between maybe an older person who has land and a younger person who wants to garden, that kind of thing. Because I know a lot of older people who do own their own land, are reluctant to have people use that land because they've heard stories of vandalism and, people not showing up or, whatever. But so it's, yeah, having an actual formal agreement might address some of that, but I don't know.
Yeah, and I know there are some people working on starting up some things like that around both in Ottawa and Toronto. I've heard some, and yes, there's some go beautifully, and then some there's hiccups. So it's always the learning curves and trial and error, and also accepting that it's not going to be perfect every time, and so sometimes it might need to adapt or adjust as you go. But yeah, and as people do gain some access to land through whatever model that they're able to, that gets to that next point you brought up about access to knowledge.
Yes. What do you do with it when you when you have the opportunity?
Yeah, because there's so many different frameworks of advice, so many different forms of advice, and there's also I find a lot of advice that is sort of internet length neglects to mention that things that work perfectly in this setting might not work perfectly in that setting, and that doesn't mean it's the wrong thing. It just means every space is a little bit different, and you have to take the time to get to know it. And that doesn't always come through when people are enthusing about, oh, I used this technique and it was perfect. And it's like, yes, I've used the same techniques in different places, which seemed fairly similar and had completely different outcomes because of some sort of a variable that I didn't find out until things started. So there's always a learning curve. I've been gardening for nearly 40 years, and every new space has a learning curve. It's always that combination of knowledge, but then every space is different. You need to develop a relationship with it.
Yeah, absolutely.
And another aspect of the knowledge that I've noticed in the last few years of really trying to learn more from Indigenous perspectives on land relationship because a lot of things we're taught under settler perspectives are about how you make the land do what you want the land to do, instead of about having a relationship with the land. And something I've really started to notice once I started to, I've had the opportunity to read more books and attend courses or talks or symposia, and also having the time to take this in, because I am not living at the margins of getting by, and I have some space to practice it, that somehow I've ended up with more access to some traditional knowledge about how to take care of the land than a lot of Indigenous people have, because of the level of disruption that has been through the systems. And it really has highlighted how disrupted access to knowledge has been for so many Indigenous communities. This is like, there's no way that after just a few years of starting to try to pay more attention to this, that I should hold more opportunity, more just basic knowledge than the general Indigenous sort of public. Nowhere near being an expert in it. And there are amazing knowledge keepers, but just, yeah, the access to it, because there's been so much disruption, is a really big thing. And yeah, I know at the Seed Sanctuary, there's been a lot of effort to work on that. Can you talk about that at all? Or?
Yeah, well, it is certainly it's a big issue, yes, because Haudenosaunee folks in particular are seed keepers. They are traditionally, they are agriculturalists traditionally. So the fact that they have a settler seed keeper who's teaching people how to save seeds on their land is perfect evidence of, yeah, what you just described. And they do have elders who obviously are perfectly capable seed keepers, but often those people have health issues and they can't do it full time, and many of them are already elderly. So there's a very real danger of that knowledge not being passed down through Haudenosaunee lines, because people are going to pass away. So yeah, there's definitely a bit of a time crunch there. So yeah, I think it's just great evidence of, and I believe they would agree with me on this, that it's a great opportunity for us to work together. Certainly the folks that I'm working with are not, they want this knowledge to spread in their own community, but they also see the advantage of it spreading, of the wider, settler and Indigenous communities having this knowledge, certainly about seed keeping. So nobody's being excluded or anything, but yeah, that's definitely a big deal.
Yeah, no, it's sort of like you want to, from a settler standpoint, it's like you want to be helpful, but also really recognizing that I shouldn't have more information about this. That's a really big, that's such a big sort of overwhelming concept that there's no way that I should have. So yeah, also lots of promoting, so and so teaches about this, so and so teaches about this. This is a book by an Indigenous author. You can find resources there. So also just trying to elevate access to resources. Another sort of facet of things I've sort of run into or have observed is that there's actually there is one area in a lot of traditional knowledge where there's a gap, in the sense of a lot of our soils and ecosystems have been really traumatized in the last couple of centuries, and that I've sort of seen some Indigenous garden projects start up and then not thrive because they have used traditional practices developed in relationship with healthy ecosystems. And yeah, that they're, and that's a space where some of us who have actually gotten into this growing in traumatized soils and have actually learned from a land care perspective of that, the tools for helping rebuild the health of those soils, that's actually something that it can be very helpful to bring back, to actually go, this might not be embedded in your traditional knowledge system because you never broke it this badly. You never had to deal with a system that is this broken as your starting point for growing the seeds. You might have had to remove some existing ecosystem plants to make space, but you never had to come to soils that are so damaged. And I don't know, I think it's in sort of you're working into an area that's a perennial sort of it looks like a hay field, so it might be a healthy soil. Or how is the soil preparation in that? Is it going well at the sanctuary? Or?
Yeah, it's going very well. One of the reasons that particular site was chosen was because it has been a hay field for as long as people can remember, at least 80 years. Yeah, we've done a certain amount of tilling, but mostly covering the soil and just getting plants in there as much as we can where we can. So, but yeah, a lot of the land in Tyendinaga has been, as you say, has been damaged. There's a lot of agriculture and a lot of conventional agriculture that happens there. Another reason why we picked that site was because it's surrounded by forest, and that breaks the pollen because there's a lot of conventional corn, just straight up monoculture GMO corn grown for acres and acres all around. So those trees break the pollen from coming from those fields into our traditional corn. Yeah, it's a little bit compacted because it's been hayed, using medium scale equipment, I guess I'm going to say. It's so there are some issues with drainage at certain times of years and various things like that, but it's not bad at all. We're really lucky. It's going to be fine.
Yes, it's a little bit stressed, but it's like, okay, I can go back to being healthy soil.
Yeah, but you're right. Like, and that experience of failure is really hard for people, right? When they're trying their very best, and they think they're following traditional ways, and then it doesn't work out. That can be really that can be traumatic in itself, right? For people that taking on that responsibility and then failing is a real detriment for people. It's really emotionally hard.
It's I've sort of seen that sort of thing happen, and I'm like, okay, well, there needs to be some tools at some point sort of put together, going before the land is ready for the traditional practices again, because of what has happened to the land, and that there needs to be sort of some narrative around that, because there's always so much emotion and around reclaiming culture for so many people, and then to have it fail is just really, it's really re-traumatizing around. And
absolutely.
there's some broken trust with the land in both directions, of caring for land and land caring for us. That's very much not just Indigenous. It's something I occasionally talk about in settler backgrounds, is if you go back enough generations, we all have a severed Indigenous land relationship, various reasons for that severing, but either we broke trust with the land, or the land did not take care of us and we had to leave. And we've been acting out that a really unhealthy relationship with land ever since, of going, I am going to make the land take care of me through whatever means necessary.
Right.
And there's not a lot of trust there, and rebuilding that trust can be a very scary very sort of tentative process, and learning what the land needs to be well it isn't always just reapplying the traditional method. Sometimes we also have to recognize we're not the only ones traumatized, the land is too, and we both need a healing process before we're really in a good place to take care of each other using the traditional methods. Yeah, so there needs to be that sort of reforming of relationship. And I know we're so lucky that a lot of the seeds were carried over time. Even though there is often so much pressure to use the better seeds, the seeds we portrayed as better. I know it could be a prickly or a complex thing around, should settlers be making an effort to grow for seed saving purposes some of the seeds to increase the populations, or should settlers not try to take more seeds? And I know it's a really complex thing, so I know you won't be able to give a blanket answer, but is there sort of discussion about that going on at the seed sanctuary?
Yeah, there is. That's a very important point. Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, the seeds that we grow were rematriated from a settler seed collection from the Heirloom Seed Sanctuary that was a ministry of the Sisters of Providence in Kingston. So rematriation is like a giving back of these traditional seeds, right? Not all of them are Indigenous, and certainly we just don't have the privilege of knowing a lot of their background. So we have to assume that many of them are Indigenous to this area, but we don't really know. So that research is just beginning. But we do sometimes have settlers approach us and say, I have some land. Can I grow some of your seeds for you, like to give back, to bulk up and give back? And we're exploring that. We definitely are having discussions about it. It hasn't, we feel like we need to have a plan in place before that happens. And right now the focus is growing seeds on the land that we have access to, and then giving them in the community. So we don't actually spread the seeds beyond Tyendinaga Mohawk territory right now. But eventually we hope to have enough that we can do that. But again, it'll be done in a mindful way. It'll be done in a very conscious way. So I'm going to say, I have been gifted seeds over the years since before I started this work. I have definitely been gifted seeds by Mohawk friends, by people from Tyendinaga, because it's just down the road, and neighbors. But I think you have to have that personal relationship first. I don't think you can just find somebody on Facebook and message them and say, can I grow some of your seeds? That's probably not appropriate. You probably, need to figure out how to actually meet people and engage with them and develop a relationship and a mutually beneficial relationship, right? A reciprocal relationship. Before you want to.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I've also heard from some people with their experiences of passing on seeds when they thought it was to somebody trustworthy, and then people turning around and actually selling them, like growing them and then marketing them, and actually not only selling the seeds, which is often not considered acceptable, and I know that varies space to space, but using the Indigenous story of the seeds as a marketing tool to sell the seeds. And there's actually a very large, I know a lot of people who are really really do not like Baker's Creek seeds, because they have a real tendency to do that. And sell the story without actually returning anything to the communities that carry the seeds, or get the story entirely wrong and promote a myth. So yeah, it can be tricky to actually have to make sure that there's a really good relationship first. All right, but we are at 3:45, so that was great. I'm really glad we had this conversation, and we'll be sending the link out to everyone who registered as well for the ones who couldn't attend live. And next week, I'm going to have a conversation with Lorraine Johnson about bylaws. So we're going to sort of move right into urban spaces and look at a lot of the look at the history of some of the bylaws, some of the legal challenges that the bylaws have not held up to. And also some of the things that if you are in an area that is covered by some bylaws that are excessively restrictive, some things you can do to start to encourage changing those bylaws in your own communities. All right. Thank you, everybody. And thank you again, Cate, for that awesome presentation. And yeah, I'll see some of you again next week. Bye.
Bye.